struggling with some issues in my personal life where I had a broken heart and I was mourning. And I'll never forget it. The pain was so bad and palpable that I could not even cry. That's how bad it was. And on that particular painful day of my life, I actually had to do a wedding in the middle of a beautiful sunny day. And I said to the Lord, Lord, I can't do this. How am I going to do this? How am I going to be joyful today for this couple, for these people? I can't do this. How am I going to be smiling in the church for pictures? How am I going to be joyful when I speak? How am I going to be joyful at the reception in the evening? Lord, I can't do this. I was literally dreading it. And of course, I had to do it, right? You don't just skip out on someone's biggest day, right? But believe me, I was feeling awful when I walked into that church, and nobody knew but me. And I remember when I got up to preach, I noticed that there was an African-American gentleman seated smack dab in the middle of the church, and he was dressed to perfection. He had on a fitted suit, a silk tie, and he was looking great. And when I started to preach, he spontaneously began to say, "Amen, amen, amen." And I looked over at my musician, who was like where Steve is, and he just gave me this jaw drop and a smile. And the gentleman continued to say amen while I was preaching, and he was actually lifting me up while I was up there. I was actually feeling better, and I found myself saying things that weren't even on the script. Amen. Amen. And it was just absolutely out of nowhere. And then I remember when I came down to receive the gifts, he looked right at me, and we both smiled. I was actually able to smile. It was incredible. And then, of course, after the wedding, there was the reception. And apparently he was a friend of the groom, a great family friend. And we looked at each other in the reception hall, which was fully packed, and we simply walked towards each other, met, and then walked towards this table. And as I was walking towards the table with him, there was a bunch of people saying, "Father, come sit with us. Father, come sit over here." And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going with this guy. I hate to say it. And so I went and I sat with him. And his name is Reverend Tony, who's a Pentecostal minister. And we sat down at the table and began to speak, and it was as if I had known him for 30 years. We began to speak, and it was so intense that everything around us disappeared. Like, I was completely unaware of even the people at our table. We spoke. I shared with him what I was going through. He actually prayed over me at the table, and it was an incredible, incredible blessing. I am still in touch with him to this very day. He literally sends me a morning blessing every single day. Today he sent me one, and it said, "Put God first, and you'll never be last." I love that. Put God first, and you'll never be last. That was this morning. So this great man of God was sent into my life when I needed the most a blessing from the Lord. I tell this story, my brothers and sisters, because despite all of my education, theological knowledge, and life experience, that day I was caught up in a storm that I could not control. I could not make the pain I was feeling go away. And I could not, by my own power, solve the problems that I was dealing with. However, what I could do was humble myself before the Lord and say, Lord, I can't do it. Lord, I can't do this. Please help me. And I've come to realize that that's actually a perfect prayer. I know it doesn't sound like Shakespeare, but that is a perfect prayer. How many times have we been in situations where we see no way out, where we cannot help ourselves, and all we can say is, Lord, I can't do it. Please help. That's where I was that day. And I can honestly stand before you today and say that the Lord will always come through when we make that prayer. The Lord will always come through, and he blesses us even in our greatest pain and in our darkest moments. And I will even add, especially in our greatest pain and our darkest moments. St. Paul today, in our second reading from 1 Corinthians, reminds us to recognize our own limitations. Because when we do, we will soon see God's power take over exactly where ours ends. He says, "Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth, but rather, God chose the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, so that no human being might boast before God." He says, "It is Jesus who is our righteousness, sanctification, redemption, and salvation. And so if we boast, we should only boast in the Lord." In other words, we can't boast about ourselves because ultimately we cannot save ourselves. And those situations in life where the Lord has to almost physically pull us through is a reminder of this. I once heard someone say that there are three types of Christians: those before the storm, those who are in the storm, and those who have left the storm. And the good news today in the gospel is that no matter where we are always blessed. In fact, we are blessed even more by God when we are suffering, as we hear in the gospel, in the Beatitudes, the blessings. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are those who are persecuted, insulted, and falsely accused, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Today's breaking of the bread, my brothers and sisters, in the Eucharist, reminds us of how Jesus, even when he had a broken heart and a broken body on the cross, continues to bless us today. Jesus is the Beatitudes. He is the source of all blessing. He is the only one that can save us. The Beatitudes reveal to us that Jesus is not alien to our pain, and that he is closer to us than we are to ourselves. The Beatitudes also reveal that we are called, like that man at the wedding in the church, to bless others, especially those who are suffering. My brothers and sisters, everyone that we encounter in life, it doesn't matter if they're rich, it doesn't matter if they have a smile on their face, every single person we encounter is carrying a cross that we don't see. Every single person that we encounter is struggling with something that they cannot overcome. Let us answer the call as believers to be a blessing to every single person we encounter. For blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. And blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. And so let us give God all the glory today and say, Lord, be with us always, before the storm, in the storm and after the storm. And help us to be there for others so that when we boast, it will only be about Jesus. Because Jesus never fails, and he always comes through.